It's back to business in Israel, but the people are not there yet. Israelis can't help thinking that the authorities did a terrible job in handling the COVID-19 pandemic and wonder if reopening businesses will put their lives at risk. Hello and welcome to this episode of Inside Israel. I'm Maryam Ozacher. Now, our latest investigation takes us to what seems to be a conflict of interest between people who'd rather stay safely at home and authorities who don't want to pay the price. To open or not to open? Stay with us as we discuss.
A new poll shows that Israelis are not satisfied with the Israeli regime's response to the coronavirus and believe that the economy should not be reopened, but the regime is rushing to reopen the economy because it is desperate and has no other choice. They blame the regime for mismanagement, saying that it put the trial and politics before the people. The Israeli regime, according to a new poll, is being accused of mismanaging the coronavirus response. The new poll by IDI, that is the Israeli Democracy Institute, shows that most Israelis believe that there will be a second and third wave and that the regime rushed to open the economy, putting their lives at risk. The report cited that the Israeli economy is on the brink and also an emergence of syndromes linked to the coronavirus. Just recently, a number of kids in Israel developed a rare inflammatory syndrome probed for possible links with COVID-19 coronavirus. They were infected shortly after Israel opened up all schools, including elementary schools. Over 200 schools have been closed since reopening as coronavirus cases in Israel rise. More than 54% of Israelis believe second and possible third wave is imminent, according to the Israeli Democracy Institute. Most Israelis believe that the regime put lives at risk by opening economy too soon. The public's perception of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's handling of the crisis is negative. Within a month, the unemployment rate shot up to 27%, with 1,125,000 people out of work. The majority of the newly unemployed are actually salaried employees on unpaid leave. The crisis means that they have no source of income apart from unemployment payments, which are no more than 20% of their regular salaries. According to the New York Times, at least 70% of all infections in Israel originated from the US, which is the worst hit country by the coronavirus. According to the Jerusalem Post, while flights from some European and other countries began to be halted starting on February 26, those from the US were not suspended until March 9th. Even in this case, some passengers from the US were allowed to enter Israel. The study said that if Israel had banned travelers from the US when it banned other countries, a substantial fraction of the transmission chains in Israel would have been prevented. At least 5% of patients were thought to be responsible for the spread of the virus to 80% of everyone infected. Where were the majority of the 5%? They were in the US and came into Israel without being quarantined.
How soon did the Israeli regime find out about the corona pandemic? Could it have been better prepared to cater to Israelis? Who is to blame for the serious mismanagement during the COVID-19 pandemic? Did the regime play politics before people? This next exclusive case study from Israel will shed light on these matters and more.
Well, like most of the people, I think, my impression is that we were not prepared for such a crisis, which, as a matter of fact, is true to all the states, not only for Israel, because nobody expected it, although, of course, there were discussions in principle about the possibility of disruptions like this one. So because of that and because of the large uncertainties that are connected with this pandemic, I think that the steps that were taken were too drastic. and they caused some benefits. Probably they minimized the number of people that were infected, but they caused great damage to our economy and to many people. We are in a very unique situation because this pandemic and its repercussions is combined with other reasons for dissatisfaction among important sectors in the Israeli society. And that is because of the very peculiar political situation in Israel. The fact that we are gone through 3 rounds of elections for our parliament, for the Knesset, with no clear decision in each one of them. And eventually, after the 3rd round, the major parties succeeded in formulating a coalition government, which nobody is happy about. Mm-hmm. So if you combine that with the dissatisfaction that is resulting from the pandemic, the end result is that many people have grievances and they want to express it in one way or another. Well, I think that what is characterizing the Israeli political arena is fragmentation. It's very fragmented. And there is no agreement on most of the issues. The people are divided. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that I oppose Prime Minister Netanyahu is because I think that he is one of the main reasons for this situation. He actually created these divisions because it provided political benefits for him. It provided political benefits for Mr. Netanyahu, but it is hurting the interest of the people at large, in my opinion. So as long as he will be the Prime Minister, that will continue to be the situation. And we can talk about different scenarios. One scenario is a scenario in which this government succeed in keeping its stability for the next 17 months. And then, according to the agreement between Mr. Gantz and Mr. Netanyahu, Mr. Gantz is supposed to replace Mr. Netanyahu. I'm not sure that it will happen because I, like many other people, don't trust Mr. Netanyahu to keep his promises. Mm-hmm. So the government may collapse in 17 months. And that looks to me a very probable scenario.
Independent Israeli-American journalist Joshua Tartakovsky joins us from New York for more on the topic. Now, Mr. Tartakovsky, here's my first question. There seems to be a serious lack of trust between people and the authorities in Israel. What would you say the main reason is?
What many Israelis fairly do not understand is why they had to remain in their homes confined for such a long period of time while effective testing was not carried out. If the government was supposedly fully drafted to tackle coronavirus and doctors were on alert, hospitals were ready, everyone was working hard around the clock to flatten the curve, why did the government not carry out the full number of coronavirus tests that it's committed itself to? And this discrepancy between the high number of tests that were committed to and the fact that this was not done seriously is placed a doubt in the minds of many Israelis as to as to the extreme mismanagement of the government in tackling this issue.
Well, some Israeli newspapers reported that the regime didn't halt flights from New York at the height of the pandemic. Can you tell us why?
The first issue that should be considered when it comes to flights from the United States coming into Israel is that although it was clear that Netanyahu was steadfast on blocking flights from various countries, he waited quite a while before he blocked flights from the United States, and that is most likely because he did not want to he did not want to have some kind of confrontation with the United States President Trump. And this ultimately means that he put the lives of his own citizens in danger, and he put the relationship with Trump above, in highest priority, above his responsibility for Israeli citizens. And that places a big question on his incompetence as a prime minister.
Now, what would you say the responsibility of regime in Tel Aviv is?
There are several quite elementary steps that the Israeli government can take to help its citizens in this crucial time of need. The first one is to actually help out various independent professionals in their 30s and 40s who are unemployed or lost a lot of money running their independent businesses. And these people can be given a stimulus to get their business back and running again, especially since they have no other resource to lean on. Another thing that could be done is to freeze all rent payments and not have them reinstated for a while until the economy is back on track. But these two things have not been done yet.
And what's the response of the authorities to accusations of mismanagement?
It seems that the Israeli government was even satisfied to a degree with the fact that they were not fully prepared to deal with COVID-19, because that allowed them to impose a draconian lockdown on the population, including extreme fines that were leveled against people who walked beyond a certain distance or didn't have a sign at the entrance to the store. And what this may show is that, in fact, the Prime Minister had an incentive to keep a lockdown going, because that way he could postpone his trial. And he seems enthusiastic about the possibility of another lockdown because and a second wave, because then he can postpone the ongoing trial against him. So there are big questions about what the Israeli government is doing.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Tartakovsky. That was Israeli-American journalist Joshua Tartakovsky from New York. Now don't go anywhere, there's much more coming up right here after the break. What do Israeli citizens believe the authorities could have done to manage the situation? What are Israelis talking about when they say that Netanyahu and his cabinet put his corruption trial before the people? We asked Israelis on the streets of the capital Tel Aviv, and here's how they responded.
ברמה העקרונית, ממשלת ישראל מתעסקת במילה גדולה בנושא הקורונה באופן שהוא מאוד למות, באופן שהוא מאוד שלבי. עושים הערכות מצב על בסיס יומיומי, ועל סמך הערכות המצב מקבלים את ההחלטות. ואין החלטות שהן בסיסות או החלטות שהן פופוליסטיות. אנחנו מנסים לאזן בין הצורך הכלכלי שהמשק יהיה פתוח במידת האפשר והעסקים יתאוששו וכוח העבודה גם ייהנה מיכולת של תפוקה, ומצד שני לאזן מול האילוצים הבריאותיים, ואם בוחנים לאורך הזמן
לעשות בדיקות חובה לכל המדינה, לכולם, קטנים, גדולים, ואז לדעת כאילו מי חולה, וככה אפשר למיין, וככה היה פחות נזק, ואפשר היה לצמצם את הרבה נזקים. נכון שהיה נזק ואנשים הפסידו, והיה סגירות של מסעדות, ולא יודע, ולא היה עבודה, אבל אני חושב אם היו עושים את הדבר הזה, היה פחות נזק והיה...
כל, איך שאני רואה, חזרנו לשגרה יותר מוקדם, אולי מבחינה כספית, בגלל התקציב של המדינה, בגלל כל זה, לא בגלל הבריאות, למען הבריאות כאילו. הילדים לבתי ספר, אז ההורים חוזרים לשגרה, הבנת? מבחינתי ואיך שאני רואה זה ככה הולך. עכשיו אני רואה שכל כאילו רוב החנויות, רוב הסופרים, רוב
Remember the 2011 social unrest where some Israelis set themselves on fire in Tel Aviv? Well, once again, there are major protests taking place. This time, the issue is serious economic hardships faced by Israelis who've had to close down their businesses due to Corona. Now, the new study by IDI also cited that as Tel Aviv has also lost almost all of its revenue, it could not afford to continue the closure of the economy. But isn't it too soon to reopen businesses as a new wave of coronavirus hits Asia? Stay tuned to find out.
The new study by IDI also cited that as Tel Aviv loses almost all of its revenue, it could not afford to continue the closure of the economy. It is especially true considering the 27% unemployment rate. The situation is even worse for independent contractors, since most of them are ineligible to receive unemployment payments. These economic hardships have revived a huge protest movement not seen since the 2011 social unrest, where Israelis set themselves on fire in the capital, Tel Aviv. The social protests that rocked Israel in the summer of 2011 were one of the worst nightmares that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had in all his years in office. Now, it looks like the protests are back and possibly bigger than ever. Those were polled, and the sentiments of protesters demonstrating against the current situation believe that it was the regime that failed them because it was focusing on Netanyahu's trial and the politics surrounding it. Netanyahu is on trial for 3 corruption charges. He is the first ever prime minister to be tried while in office, the longest serving prime minister in Israel's history, after 11 uninterrupted years in office, entered the courtroom charged with bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. If convicted, he could spend several years behind bars. He himself denies any wrongdoing. Thousands of protesters calling him the crime minister have been demonstrating outside his official residence. They've been taking to the streets despite the coronavirus pandemic still hitting Israel hard to make a point that they've simply had enough of Netanyahu. They're also protesting the dire economic situations in Israel. Just recently, Israel's economy shrank 7.1% in the third fiscal quarter of 2020. Economists believe that this is a collapse of Israel's economy. Technically, it can take years for any recovery. The outcome of the dire situation will likely negatively impact Israelis for years to come.
Richard Silverstein, the editor of the Tikkun Olam blog, joins us from Seattle. Mr. Silverstein, it's always great to have you with us on Inside Israel. Now, it seems that all fingers point to Netanyahu as the culprit. Now, what has been Netanyahu up to recently?
Well, from what I understand, the Israeli government is offering some help to people whose businesses have been impacted and people who are unemployed, but it's going to have a huge impact on all economies around the world. And I've been reading, for example, in the United States, that the economists don't expect us to come out of this until 2022. We're talking about over nearly 2 years from now. So Israel was in a sort of an economic boom of sorts before this happened, and I think it's really stopped that in the tracks, and I think it's going to take quite a while to come back. And some of the very successful Israeli businesses in technology and surveillance and other issues like that may also be impacted by the changes to economies after COVID-19 goes away, because businesses are going to change, go out of business, and new businesses are going to come on the scene that are going to respond to the society and changes in it after COVID-19. And Israel may be harmed somewhat by that if it doesn't adapt properly.
Now we're seeing all of these social movements rising in Israel that have different demands. Can they make any serious changes?
Well, I am a little bit dubious to say that there's any serious social movement in Israel that's going to bring major change internally in the country. I think that the far right fascist forces in Israel are in total control. There may be some on the left in Israel that are willing to protest and are willing to go out on a limb and stake their lives on offering a different perspective politically, but they don't really pose any kind of threat to Netanyahu. There were 6,000, I believe, who protested the annexation in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. The police did want to cancel that demonstration, but they were really forced to allow it. And the people mostly, I think, engage in social distancing to protect themselves. So the rally itself was conducted reasonably, but there's no hope for these people to make an impact on Israel. Israel is a fascist government, and it's going to stay that way. And the left is fragmented and disjointed and has no impact, basically.
Now, at the height of the coronavirus, which communities were targeted the most and why?
Well, there was mismanagement of the response by Israel to COVID-19. First of all, the Israeli health authorities basically blamed the minority communities of Israeli Palestinians and the ultra-Orthodox, and they quarantined those communities. Sometimes they solely blocked them off using military troops. They also permitted the Shin Bet secret police to use a tracking app that had been used to monitor terrorist activity. And they used this app to monitor COVID-19, people who had COVID-19. They used it to also monitor people who had been in the vicinity, the physical vicinity of people with COVID-19. So it was using an app that was designed to prevent terrorism and basically using it against individual civilians who might have been ill. And these were very serious breaches of privacy for Israelis who unfortunately don't really have a strong sense of their privacy rights as some people do in the West. But Israel was very slow to become aware of COVID-19 and take the proper actions. Eventually they did so, but it took them quite a while.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Silverstein. That was Richard Silverstein, the editor of the Tikkun Olam blog. It's now time to look at news that's making the press in Israel. Haaretz. Arab residents of Yafa, the oldest neighborhood of the Israeli capital Tel Aviv, are protesting the demolition of a Muslim cemetery. The dispute began when Israel destroyed the cemetery of the site known in Arabic as Maqbarat al-It'af in Tel Aviv's biggest Muslim graveyard. Vynet. A new report has shown the month of April as the worst month for Israeli business sector in decades. The economic crisis caused by the coronavirus epidemic has particularly affected Israel's manufacturing sector, which is highly dependent on exports that were reduced due to the worldwide lockdowns. The Jerusalem Post. Israel has coordinated with U.S. sanctions against ICC with the Trump administration, according to a new report. Israel has not taken too well the fact that it's under investigation by the International Criminal Court for war crimes against the Palestinian people. The Times of Israel. Looks like another coronavirus wave has made its way to Israel. Tel Aviv just recorded over 200 new coronavirus infections in a day for the first time since late April, before it began easing restrictions. We've reached the end of this program on the economic complications and the Israeli regime's mismanagement. Now, do you perhaps have a personal account you'd like to add? We're always ready to hear. Simply go to presstv.com and leave us your comments regarding the issue. From me and the production team here at Inside Israel, it's goodbye for now.